It's day 2 of presentations. Hope you're as excited as I am, and I'm really excited. So yeah, that's what we have. Our remote presenter today. Nikki's actually going to be joining us from Bolivia. I tell you, that's some dedication right there. So I'm going to move the camera and then go sit down, and then once I'm settled, everybody can take place. Again, make sure when you're presenting that you can be heard from the microphone because it defeats the purpose if you're talking quietly over there. Okay. So use a booming voice, which won't be a problem.
All right, hello everyone.
Just a second. I just want you. I apologize. I know the timing was terrible on that, but
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Easiest presentation ever.
All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, specifically the machine learning side of it. Okay, some of the things that we'll be going over is the introduction, background, the current status, the future considerations, and the conclusion. All right, I'll be doing the introduction. So what is machine learning? Machine learning is defined as a branch of AI. It focuses on the use of data and algorithms to imitate the way that humans learn, gradually improving its accuracy, or in simpler terms, it's the capability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. So there's 3 components of machine learning, and that is, the first is computational algorithm at the core of making determinations. The second is variables and features that make up the decision. And third is the base knowledge for which the answer is known that enables the system to learn. So it basically works like the model is fed data for which the answer is known, and then the algorithm is then run and adjustments are made until the output agrees with that known answer. And at this point, the increasing amounts of data are just input to keep the system learning. So there are 4 types of machine learning. Dr. Barnes might have mentioned this in his chapter 12 lecture. Hopefully you guys remember, but we have supervised, where the algorithm is given a set of training data. Unsupervised, where the algorithm is given unlabeled data. Semi-supervised, where data are labeled but might be missing some information or not labeled correctly. And the last one is reinforcement, which is trial and error. We use machine learning when human expertise does not exist, such as navigating on Mars. When humans can't explain their expertise, such as speech recognition. When models must be customized, for example, personalized medicine. And lastly, when models are based on huge amounts of data, such as genomics. I'm so sorry. Could we turn off the light so that you can see the font, because it wasn't that unclear when we were doing the presentation. So that you guys can see better. All right, machine learning is important because it increases the efficiency and accuracy, especially in predicting outcomes and interpreting data. It provides better customer service, and data-driven decisions keep a company ahead of competition. It has many applications in a variety of industries, from manufacturing and retail, healthcare and life sciences, to travel and hospitality, financial services, and utilities. Tasks that are best solved by using machine learning are recognizing patterns, generating patterns, recognizing anomalies, and prediction. And then Dr. Burns also might have talked about this, but if you weren't paying attention, now's your chance. We have 2 tasks that machine learning systems are designed to perform. The first is classification, which seeks to assign labels, dividing the input into output groups. And these applications include face recognition, character recognition, and speech recognition. And the second is regression, which seeks to predict real numbers. So the applications of regression include financial forecasting, testing automobiles, and weather analysis and prediction.
Okay, now I'll be going over the background. So machine learning dates back quite a bit, all the way back to 1949 in a book titled The Organization of Behavior. And in the model in this book, it basically introduced the idea of how human intelligence and brain activity related to artificial neural networks. And then in 1952, Arthur Samuel created the first ever self-learning program where computers could basically play games and then learn from themselves. And then these ideas were put together in 1958, where the program of the perception was created. And this program was learned from data and became the foundation of artificial neural networks. Then in its developmental years, in 1966, the ELIZA was created, and this was the first program that could communicate with humans. Then a year later, in 1967, the nearest neighbor algorithm was created, and this was created to map routes and primarily used for sales personnel back then to find their most efficient routes. And then in the 1970s, the discovery of multilayers was created. And this led to the discovery of artificial neural networks and backpropagation. Backpropagation is the program's ability to learn from its mistakes and adjust to create, like, adapt to new output. And then artificial neural networks was the program's ability to find patterns that were too complex for humans to find. And then in the 1980s, machine learning separated from artificial intelligence, and this was a big developmental year for machine learning. And then in its recent times, the boosting algorithm was created, and this was the program's ability to, like, improve its accuracy. A good example of this is the ability for emails to be the spam to be filtered out of emails. And then in the early 2000s, speech recognition and facial recognition were created. And now machine learning is used for, like, self-driving vehicles, identifying exoplanets, and ChatGPT. And then some of its common uses are natural language processing, fraud detection, analyzing sales data, product recommendations, and learning management systems.
Okay, so for the current status of machine learning, so ChatGPT was released just a little over a year ago today, and within the first 5 days of it being public, over 1 million people had used it. And this was largely due to it being shared on social media and gaining popularity through that. It was text only and could only answer questions based on the training that it had had up until that point. So it would often times provide false information. And the way it was trained, so it was first trained through supervised learning. So the trainers would play the role of a user and then of ChatGPT, and this gave it the base layer to learn how humans communicate and interact. And then later on, it was trained through reinforcement learning. So the trainers would just interact with it, use it, ask it questions, and give it feedback and make changes based on the answers that it provided. GPT-4 is the most recent version of ChatGPT, and the new advancements and features that this version has are improved model alignment, so just being able to interact better with the user, lower likelihood of generating offensive output, increased factual accuracy, better steerability, which is just being able to make changes based on the user's request, and then internet connectivity. Some more maybe simple examples of machine learning that we see every day are product recommendations. So on Amazon, for example, it's looking for relationships and connections between products that you buy, search, or look at to provide recommendations for you. Email spam filtering, it's looking at a lot of different characteristics within email to determine if it is spam. And when it's wrong and you mark something not spam, it's able to learn from that to do it better. Social media optimization, providing you content based on things you like, search, look at, and then predictive text.
Hey guys, so this is my part. I'm going to talk about the impact of machine learning on business and accounting as a whole. So some of the benefits of machine learning is automation, which is like taking away the mundane tasks of accountants, like putting in journal entries, working on Excel, and copy pasting. You know, accountants have to do a lot of that, and also just cleaning the data. And with machine learning, they can like manipulate the data to a way where you just tell it what to do and it does it a lot quicker than humans. So therefore, it will lead to a higher profit margin because higher productivity and higher efficiency will reduce costs. Also, this could also potentially take away some accountants because this leads to the drawbacks of machine learning, which is like job replacement, because that machine learning can do the jobs of some accountants. We won't need as many accountants as we have in the past, like for right now. Another one is becoming too heavy reliance on AI. Elon Musk said, like, if you're a company, try not to use AI because that will like lead to your company to lack of innovation, also just lack of critical thinking. And then another thing is the impact on accountants, because most of us are accountants. And I think one of the roles is like accountants' role will change, but the fear is always like, will it take away accountants' jobs? I think it won't, because instead, as opposed to be working in the machine, we'll be producing the accounting softwares and be more data analyzers and interpreters as opposed to the data crunchers. And then also some important skills that we'll always need is critical thinking skills and rational decision-making skills, which AI, I don't think can bring to the table. But yeah, to the next. And then some current fears and excitements about machine learning. So some excitements is just the technology improvements for military weapons, healthcare, diseases, and finance and business. They can detect fraud and risk assessment. So they can like put all the possibilities and outcomes for the IRS, FBI, also just financial risk. And then lastly, can help make life and death decisions. Like we don't think about this much, but like it probably could help like prevent wars or destroying wars with all the data that we can crunch at a faster rate. And then lastly, the fears, which often when there's something new technologies being made, humans don't know like the consequences. And one of them is destroying humanity, which seems extreme, but it's one of the fears. And so a new thing called Q-Star is also called artificial general intelligence. So AI is like ChatGPT, where information is being fed, and then there's AGI, which seeks out its own information when it doesn't know something, which people have feared that it could surpass human intelligence. So that's a big fear. And then lastly, it's like taking our jobs because we were afraid when the computer came out and the robots, like anything like that could take our jobs. So that's a fear. And lastly, just miscommunication, misinformation of be able to produce fake images and fake messages. So yeah, the news. So just these are some things we need to be aware of.
All right, so moving on to some future considerations with AI. Some of the things that machine learning is able to do is how we write code, how to diagnose illnesses, how to create content. However, move on to the next one. It requires a lot of careful consideration in order to maximize benefits and mitigate risks, which I'll be talking about in a second. So part of understanding how to use machine learning is understanding the problem that lies with machine learning. So one of the problems is data acquisition. So nowadays we have a bunch of access to data all over the internet, as we've seen throughout this course and throughout presentations, due to the increasing digitization of documents, as well as the internet adoption, especially throughout the years, which has led to the big data revolution. So nowadays, if you go on the internet, there's just like so much data floating around, but that doesn't mean that the data is accurate. We know that on the internet, there's a lot of inaccurate data, there's a lot of false information and stuff like that. So for the data acquisition, machine learning can only produce relevant and high quality results if fed enough data into the model. So kind of like how Lauren was talking about, kind of like how ChatGPT at first would give false data. Dr. Barnes also gave an example of when ChatGPT would kind of like make a mistake, and then you would tell it, and then it would actually learn from that. So it is important to understand that we will get accurate data from machine learning only if that accurate data was fed into the model. So then this raises the question of how unbiased and how inaccurate the information can be. So it is important to keep in mind that this information has to be unbiased and it has to be as accurate as possible. And the garbage in, garbage out method is a principle that pretty much tells the machine learning what is accurate and what is not. And it gets rid of like that false and inaccurate information. The second part of understanding the problem is resources. Of course, machine learning requires a lot of resources, such as powerful computers, the time for developing and kind of like analyzing that data, revising the model, financing, data collection. So it is important that businesses understand that they need to be prepared to make an investment on this. So if businesses are not willing to adapt into like, getting these powerful computers, taking the time for developing the data, taking the time to actually analyzing the data and stuff like that, then their data, if they want to implement like machine learning techniques, might not be as accurate. So businesses need to be prepared to make that big investment, especially like money-wise, for these kinds of resources that they need in order to implement machine learning.
Furthermore, we have the problem of data transformation. Contrary to popular belief, machine learning technology isn't made for identifying and modifying algorithms. It's actually about transferring raw data into a set of features to capture the essence of that information. Given this fact, it is expected that machine learning will make some mistakes that affect its efficiency in the long run. And this is why we say that error susceptibility is a major aspect to consider when transforming data into machine learning, which will then take us into result interpretation. A machine learning model tends to make self-fulfilling predictions in kind of like what Stephanie was talking about. When the training data and identified patterns are wrong, the algorithms will still use this information as a basis for generating and processing new data. And this may even take some time before the user even realizes that the model has been working in favor of this underlying bias. And for this reason, result interpretation may turn into a very challenging task for the user. But with all that said, there are still a lot of good things that could come out from investing and working on machine learning, such as quantum computing effects, which would make simultaneous multi-stage operations possible, which are then expected to reduce execution time in high-dimensional vector processes. We also have a big model creation, which is an all-purpose model that can perform various tasks at the same time. This would be really helpful because you'll be able to train a model on a number of domains according to your needs, or the business needs. For example, it could, in theory, diagnose cancer or classify dog images by breed. We also have adjustments in distributed machine learning portability, which would create a world where scientists would no longer have to reinvent algorithms from scratch on each platform. Instead, they would be able to immediately integrate their work into new systems along with their user databases. And finally, we can say that scientists are also striving for a no-code environment, meaning that machine learning technology is likely to keep minimizing coding efforts for data teams. And this way, non-programmers will be actually able to access machine learning with no postgraduate degree needed. They'll instead be able to simply download several packages and take an online course on how to work these programs and create whatever they would need with that. So there's a big things coming up if we choose to invest in them and do that correctly. And just as a conclusion to wrap everything up, we can say that machine learning is a branch of AI. There's 4 different types. It also has evolved really quickly and will continue to evolve quickly if we keep working on it, which we probably will. Since this system learns from instructions, it has a tendency to showcase this bias with the information given. So it's essential that the information given is very clean and focused on being neutral, for example. And data is all around us. We just have to be very mindful on how to use it. But thank you very much for listening to us. Are there any questions?
We don't have questions. No. So one of the common themes of the presentation, which I think is a very relevant thing to talk about, how machine learning, especially like ChatGPT, was based on data that was provided, that was volunteered. And so there's the interesting story of the machine learning tool that Bing was using for a while, Microsoft Bing. So they implemented their new AI, and within hours, it was spewing racial epithets to users because of the volunteered data was just completely and totally, well, volatile, obviously. Do you think machine learning tools currently have the capacity to sort out what is good information versus or good data versus bad data?
I think like we talked about it earlier, it kind of like depends on how much data you feed into the model. But I do think that, for example, like, newer versions of ChatGPT might be able to kind of like, recognize that that data might be wrong. But also I do believe that kind of like the example that I was referring to whenever, sometimes you go on ChatGPT and you tell it to tell you something and then it gives you wrong information. I believe that the user also can be helpful into kind of like feeding that information and saying like, no, actually, this is wrong. This is actually the correct information. So again, using tools like ChatGPT or any other machine learning tools that are available can be very, very helpful. But again, it's always good to double check with other sources just to make sure that you are, kind of like presenting that accurate information, if that makes sense.
So otherwise you end up depreciating money or something.
Pretty much, yeah. No, not necessarily, but yeah.
Tyler, you brought up a really interesting point about how machine learning is probably going to reduce reduce the current role of accountants.
Oh, yeah.
So do you think that that's going to alter their profession or business and accounting professions, or do you think that that's going to result in a lower demand overall for our skills?
I think for accountants, might be a lower demand, but I think overall as a business, I think the business will benefit from AI and machine learning. But I think the accountant's role, but I haven't done the actual accounting myself, so it's hard to say, but like I know there's a lot of, when I did an internship, there was a lot of like work that could have been replaced with machine learning, which is like mundane tasks that could be replaced. But then we will have like I was saying, accountants like managers make those critical thinking decisions that machine learning couldn't. So then there will be less accountants. I don't know if they would take away accountants as a whole because we just need people to know like what's the meaning behind the numbers. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so one thing that all colleges do, especially true in state, is business students are all kind of put the ringer and we have to do 221 and 220 or 220 and 221 financial and managerial accounting. Do you think that will be necessary in the new tools of business AI and machine learning?
I'd say so, just because expanding your like all-roundedness, I suppose just knowing one industry, knowing marketing, accounting, finance, it's really helpful. I mean, like people say learning never help, always want to learn. So like the machine might know the accounting, but we still have to know it too. So definitely don't take out learning for us, because if we do that, we're gonna be like dumbing than the robots, basically. Yeah.
I think for that, it's kind of important to understand that no matter how powerful machine learning can be, it's always going to learn from a human being. And like, there's a lot of like for example, there's a lot of TikToks that I've seen that they say like, we're going to have to develop a machine learning or kind of like AI bot to teach other machine learning tools and stuff. And something that's been very trendy is like the music machine learning that's going on. I don't know if you guys knew that there was like a Bad Bunny song that was produced by a machine learning tool, and it sounded almost exactly the same. And it was very kind of like a big thing because it was more successful than his entire album that he just released. So it raises the question of how scared should we be from these models and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's important to know that we are actually the people that are feeding into these models. So understanding that we kind of like have the control over them can kind of like reduce the fear that people may have of, is it gonna destroy humanity, going to the extremes and stuff like that. And as for kind of like getting rid of jobs, I do think that maybe machine learning, there are certain things like Tyler was talking about, mundane tasks that machine learning can actually start doing, and it might get rid of like some entry level positions, but I don't think that it's going to get rid of all of the jobs, especially like senior executives and stuff, like there are certain things that only humans are able to do. And as long as we understand that, I think we should be good on how to make a really successful use of these tools. Any other questions?
Guess if Bad Bunny can be replaced, none of us are saying so. Different, yeah.
All right.
It's like, I'll take a photo.
I don't know why.
Okay, so our group is doing data breaches. I'm Grace.
I'm Austin.
I'm Clayton.
I'm Mary. I'm Madeline.
Okay. So first, we're just going to talk about what is a data breach. So it is when unauthorized individuals gain access to confidential information within databases without the permission of the data owner. So that can include theft, disclosure, manipulation of sensitive data, and that can put into jeopardy personal information, financial records, passwords, or intellectual property. So this can occur for various reasons, including cyber attacks, hacking, phishing, employee negligence, or the exploitation of vulnerabilities in software or hardware. So compromised data may be used for identity theft, financial fraud, or other malicious activities. To mitigate this impact, companies should implement security measures like encryption and firewalls and multi-factor authentication. Incident response plans should be used to detect and respond to data breaches promptly. So then how does a data breach happen? We have 5 examples here, including phishing, which is used to trick individuals into providing sensitive information such as usernames and passwords. And then we have insider threats, which is when employees within an organization compromise data security, which would be like mishandling of sensitive information, sharing passwords, or intentionally stealing data. And then if there are unsecure or stolen devices, this would be if devices are not properly secured or encrypted, then the data they contain may become vulnerable, just such as laptops, smartphones, or external drives. And then weak authentication. So if passwords are weak or easily guessable, authorized individuals may gain access to systems and data. And then lastly, third-party breaches. So if vendors or service providers experience a data breach, then they will indirectly impact the security of the organizations that use their services.
So I'm going to give a general background of data breaches. Listed here are just some of the larger ones, ranked from largest to smallest. The first data breach took place in France in 1834. 2 thieves hacked into the French telegraph system and then stole a bunch of financial market information. First, we're going to talk about Yahoo, which took place in 2013 to 2016. It was one of the worst data breaches because over 3 billion accounts were exposed. A team of Russian hackers used backdoors, stolen backups, and then access cookies to gain access to everybody's accounts. And then they stole a whole bunch of their personal information. Because the company failed to disclose the incident, it resulted in a $35 million fine and 41 lawsuits. And then Microsoft, their data breach took place in January 2021 and affected over 30,000 US companies and then over 60,000 companies worldwide. Hackers gained unauthorized access to their emails just because of a few small coding errors that took place. And then it allowed to break into the unsupervised system. And then the third one was the First American Financial Corporation in May 2019. It was victim to an enormous data breach due to a website design error called insecure direct object reference. This allowed access to private information without the use of an authorization like security question or password or anything like relative to that. Roughly 885 million files were released due to this, including bank account numbers, social security numbers, driver's license, and wire transfers. Facebook, April 2021 was their biggest data breach, but they kind of have a lot. So if you're using Facebook, you might want to look into your security measures. But it took place when the user was syncing their contacts with their profile. And 530 million accounts were exposed and had all of the personal information that was linked to Facebook. And then LinkedIn had one in April 2021 where the user identities of 700 million people were exposed when performing a data scrape of the website. This in turn obviously violated their terms of service, and then all of their emails became exposed to ransomware attacks.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the current status of data breaches today. So as of Q2 of just this year, there were 110.8 million accounts worldwide that were breached. And the 4 top countries that were affected by this were the US, Russia, Spain, and France. And then of the 111 million, 51 million were in North America, 97% of that was here in the United States. The top 3 industries that are most affected today are small businesses, government, and healthcare. So small businesses obviously are going to be affected because they don't usually have the resources available to enact proper cybersecurity measures. So they're very vulnerable to attacks. Government can range all the way from the attacker wanting profit to government security. I came across a case in March of this year where DC government officials had their healthcare insurance plans hacked, and after everything was settled, the article stated that they thought the person that had done this was attempting to just make money. They weren't really targeting government officials because they wanted to take over the world or anything crazy. So usually someone who's attempting to do a data breach is really just looking to make as much money as possible. And then healthcare, we mentioned this in AIS a little bit, but this one is attacked so frequently because of the very confidential, private, personal information that it provides. And then also the health information can be used to actually craft like customized phishing emails. So the person that receives it is more likely to respond if it has something very pertinent to their health in it. And then the top 2 malware that have been used recently in the past few weeks, most often are phishing, which Grace mentioned, and then mobile, which mobile is anything that really targets mobile devices to cause the collapse of the system and leakage of personal information. So it's hardly surprising that this one is very popular because at this point, most people have a mobile device, and as smartphones evolve, so will the malware that's used to attack them. And then these are just some additional statistics that we thought were interesting. The top 5 companies ranked in terms of loss of sensitive information as of this year: Sweden, Germany, US, Japan, and UK. So the 2 companies that outdid US stated that the reasons for their hacks were lack of security measures and errors of third party. And then most significant data breaches causes to date, Pan4, Yahoo, and Adar all have affected like billions and billions of people and records. And then the average cost of data breach, these were the top 3 regions, with the US at the top with about 9,480,000.
Now, it's also important for companies to know what to do after a data breach happens, or if it does happen. So first and foremost is to secure the system. To fix the vulnerabilities that may have caused the breach, companies have to go in and secure it first. After they've secured the breach, they must identify and make an assessment, an overall assessment, to figure out why the breach possibly have occurred and the overall cause of it. It's also important for a company to remove critical information from the breach. So once they remove critical information, they take it away from the current breach so that it can't be breached again. And then there's a change in security measures and procedures. Companies have to change the old procedures and measures or create new ones, because obviously it did not work if there was a breach that happened. And then it's also really important for them to interview the person or people who have found the breach. If they can interview them, they can figure out how the breach was found and possibly why the breach has occurred. And then potential safeguards are basically preventative measures that a company can do to prevent breaches from occurring. The most important is to educate the employees on to ensure all employees are well educated on how to have strong passwords, how to keep data secure, and spot and avoid potential breaches from happening. It's also important to create and update system procedures often, so the system is current and procedures are required to ensure security is safe. And then backup and data recovery is also important because having backups of the data is in case of a loss, so the company still has some data available. And then update and maintain security software. It's important to take proper precautions in order to maintain a secure environment so that the continuous updates are secure of the software. And then data quality, the company or individual can organize or rank their data by level of importance to also provide security.
Now that we've spoken a little bit about how a company can prevent a data breach and what to do in case of a data breach, there are some additional future considerations that a company should take into account. The first one being laws and regulations. All around the world, new laws and regulations are being put into effect, such as the GDPR or the General Data Protection Regulation Act in the EU. These acts outline what a company or organization should do in the case of a data breach. A lot of these laws are focused mainly on the protection of the consumer, since a lot of companies, even though we would like to hope that most companies are focusing on our personal safety and privacy, some of them may cut corners, and it's important to kind of have the standardization that these laws put into effect. And these add these additional safeguards for personal data, and it's just a very important thing to have in any society, just basically mandate how a company should handle this. Additionally, multiple mathematical models have been developed by mathematicians and scientists that are able to predict with low variance when a data breach will occur. This is incredibly important because this is based upon actual data collected by the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. And these are very important models because even though these hackers and people that are performing these data breaches are getting smarter and more tricky with how they're performing these acts, the people that are fighting against it are also getting smarter and using stuff like data and using the data, so to speak, to fight the data breaches in a way, kind of developing these situations where we can kind of prevent a data breach from happening before it even happened in the first place. And going back a little bit to what Austin said, we do need a plan of action to be put in place as well for every company. So again, standardization, as I mentioned in the laws and regulations part, is incredibly important because it outlines exactly what different employees should do in the case of a data breach. Establishing protocols and training employees are just some of the ways that data breaches can be prevented from happening. And so a plan of action is probably the most important consideration that companies should think about enacting into the future. In conclusion, globally, 30,000 websites are hacked daily. That is not a small statistic at all. That is a high number. And for the bigger websites, as the internet grows, this is becoming more and more common and more of a threat. They're ever evolving and they're always occurring. There's never a time when a data breach doesn't occur. It'll just keep happening and happening unless we figure out ways to prevent it, which we are. Large data breaches occur very regularly at this point. I feel like every time I open the news, there's more and more data breaches that are happening. I hear about different websites just having all these crazy privacy concerns and leaked information, and it's getting a little scary. However, government and healthcare are the top industries in which this is occurring, which is even more concerning, especially with healthcare, because healthcare is vitally important to everybody's health, and that could jeopardize people's livelihoods a lot of times. But thankfully, organizations are currently investing more in protection, and the more money that gets put into these protocols and safety concerns is allowing the industry to kind of realize how important it is to prevent these data breaches.
Do you think organizations spend more resources on prevention, or do you think they spend resources on correction when it comes to data breaches?
I think correction, because
I agree.
Company.
Yeah.
I agree with correction because from what I've heard, like when it happens, it's super expensive. So they probably don't put enough into prevention and then have to spend lots of money correcting it.
I was gonna say the opposite, actually. I was thinking more in prevention, just because I think that companies are trying to avoid those large sums, so they're probably putting more into it to prevent that, but.
I think as they become more common, if a company has never had a data breach before, they're putting more into preventative measures. And I think those companies that obviously have nothing in place for when something like this can happen, obviously they're gonna be spending more money on correction.
Can we agree, between the six of us, actually between the class, can we agree that, preventative measures would probably be better suited for this particular issue?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
how do we quantify prevention? Because I think that's the problem that a lot of organizations have, is they can't quantify what they spend on prevention would actually achieve a quantifiable benefit. They can say, I'm gonna spend $10 million on these controls and these protocols in place to stop data breaches. But the only way that you can actually articulate that cost is to actually see what would happen if you actually had a data breach, which they won't if they implement a measure. So do you think that's a impediment to why law organizations do not implement preventive measures?
I think it definitely could be a factor. I think it's definitely something to consider. I mentioned in the section that I spoke about with the mathematical models about when people are able to predict when data breaches are occurring, but that doesn't necessarily entail the size of the data breach, if that makes sense. A lot of it is just kind of guessing what could happen and not about what will happen, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, I think it's important too that companies can have lots of money that they have on the books as they're spending to have preventative measures, but if that doesn't equate to good, like, preventative controls, then it doesn't equate to protecting the company at all. So I think that a company could have less than another competitor, but if they're using it more effectively, then they're going to be better off.
So this is probably an unfair question, but is it reasonable to place the onus for data breaches on the organizations whose data is breached? Should we be placing some of it on the users as well?
That's a good question. I think I kind of spoke about it a little bit with when I was talking about the new laws that are being put into place globally, like the GDPR that I mentioned. That is a big concern because a lot of companies aren't being truly responsible for people's data in the way that I think a lot of people would like them to be. I think a lot of people just put this blind trust in a lot of organizations to make sure that their data is safe, and they don't really actively feel like, oh, well, it's not my fault. I gave them the data. So it's their responsibility to kind of do that. I think that's most people's opinion about data, especially with the age of social media and Facebook, where people just put everything on the internet that they think. And you would hope that these companies would take it seriously. But I mean, personally, I am more aware of, especially, I mean, after the research, I'm more aware of what I put on the internet as well, because anything can get leaked. But I think most people are not thinking about that really in their day-to-day lives.
I was gonna say, it kind of goes, I think it can go both ways, because I guess in the example of Facebook, there's a lot of apps on my phone that'll have like the safe password or the Face ID and have it just in there. But like when it comes to like my card number and all things like that, I've had my debit card I think hacked like quite a few times now, and it's always annoying every time. And so like whenever I'm making a payment or something like that, I always make sure that my card isn't saved, just to like put that extra bound of security on there. But I think it depends on how much the user wants to trust the company, and how much faith you have in the company that nothing's gonna happen, that they are paying for those preventive measures. But I think it can go both ways.
I think it's mainly the company, in my opinion, but users definitely do play a part because I mean, I know a lot of people, like we talked a lot about usernames and passwords getting stolen, or like people just don't really have a strong password and then it's found out because it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. So users definitely play a part in, not protecting their own things.
So we've talked about this in class, but I want to get your impressions on this. Do you think that this is not necessarily isolated data breaches, but data breaches is a good example of this? Do you think that this is a generational issue? And what I mean specifically is, do you think that we're a generation behind on being able to be solvent on this? Because I talked about people who are in power on my age, and while I'm hip and I'm on top of everything. There are people who are oblivious that are my age, that just, that like you don't use dynamic passwords, you use like chicken 1, 2, 3 as their password and stuff like that. Whereas the people who are conducting the data breaches are often people who are your generation, who are far more data savvy and far more up to date on technology. Do you think that this is going to be a recurring problem over generations, that we will see this, the people who are kind of responsible for making sure that these technologies are updated and the protocols are followed are completely and totally outdated in their perception of the way things work?
I would say it's a probability. I mean, some generations are more tech savvy and more data, like more used to the data, so they're probably more aware of it. And it also just depends on the person. But I think it's very possible that each generation has their own version of like what they think is secure and what they think is like enough preventative to save their data.
I think it's hard to say just because it seems like there's two sides of like before technology was big and now we're in the place where information and technology is really big. So from here on out, it's kind of, we have to wait and see, but I would almost say that I can see that happening again, a pattern, but also I feel like our generation in general is very tech savvy, but we're also like raising children with iPads at like 3 years old. So we're almost starting them really early, and I can see them like just immediately getting into the information technology side and being more with that. So I think we'll have to wait and see, but in general, I think that there won't be quite as big as a difference between the two generations.
I was gonna say, I feel like it would be pretty steady because as I think about like data breaches and technology always advancing and how much worse it could get, I also think that technology is always advancing, so those preventative measures could also be better. And then, I don't know, I feel like it would still be a steady streamline of both. I would hope that it would just get solved, but.
I don't think we can blame the older generations because they haven't grown up with it like we have.
Yeah.
And then like Madeline was saying, like, it's just gonna continue to get, like, we're gonna be able to prevent it better, but there's also gonna be people who are gonna be better at breaching the data. So I think that's just how it is. Like, we'll grow, the next generation will grow up with more of it, and we can't blame the older generation for not knowing much about it.
All right, class, you heard it from Grace. It's not mine. Any other questions? Good job.
I don't know, what grade do you want?
100.
100%.